The wind blew low and steady across the empty plains, carrying with it the scent of rain that never seemed to come. The sun had already begun its slow descent behind the jagged outline of the red mesas, and the world looked dipped in bronze and shadow. A lone wagon stood tilted on one side, its wheel broken, the fabric of its canopy torn by wind and time. Beside it sat a boy no older than 12, his face streaked with dust, and his hands clutching the last of a biscuit he had been saving since morning. He stared at the horizon as though expecting someone to rise out of it, someone who might tell him where to go next. But the plains remained quiet. The boy had not spoken a word since the wagon stopped rolling that morning. He had watched the mule collapse, had watched the last of his water spill into the dry ground, and had done nothing but stare. He wasn't sure how far he was from anything that could be called a town. His father had always been the one holding the reins, the one who knew which rivers still had fish and which tribes were friendly. But his father wasn't here anymore. The boy had buried him 2 days ago under a mound of loose dirt near a cottonwood that had long since gone gray and hollow. He had marked the place with a rusted tin cup and a stone shaped like a heart, because that was all he had to leave. Now the only sound left to him was the slow creak of the wagon in the wind and the rasp of his own breathing. He wasn't crying anymore. There wasn't much use in that. He had learned fast that the land didn't care who you were or what you'd lost. Out here, everything belonged to silence. Then he saw the figure. At first, it was no more than a shape moving along the rib of the ridge. The boy squinted, shading his eyes with one hand. The figure moved like smoke, slow and cautious, blending into the rust-colored stone. For a long while the boy thought it was a coyote, or maybe just his eyes playing tricks after too much sun. But when the figure stepped into the open, he saw it was a man-or, maybe a boy not much older than himself. His skin was the color of the earth, his hair long and dark, his face still as a stone carving. He wore a deerskin shirt and carried a bow across his back. The boy froze, unsure whether to run or wave. He had heard stories about the Apache from travelers at the last trading post. Some said they could move without sound, that they hunted ghosts and spoke to the spirits of rivers. Others said they were killers, silent and sure as the night. But this one looked thin, tired maybe, his feet bare and dusted white from the trail. When their eyes met, neither moved. For a long stretch of seconds, the wind between them seemed to stop. Then the boy stood, slow and shaky, his voice breaking as he spoke for the first time in days. "Were you abandoned too?" he asked. The Apache said nothing. He only looked at the boy, the corner of his mouth tightening like he was trying to understand the words. The boy tried again, this time with a softer tone, as though speaking to a stray animal. "I don't got nowhere to go," he said. "My pa. He's gone. Been gone 2 days now." The Apache blinked, then shifted his weight. He didn't answer, but his eyes flicked toward the wagon, the dead mule, and then to the boy's hands, small, cracked, and empty. Finally he took a few steps forward, slow and deliberate, stopping just far enough that the boy could see the knife hanging from his belt.
Oh.
The boy's heart began to pound. He wanted to back away, but something held him still. There was something in the Apache's face, loneliness, maybe, or a kind of quiet that looked too familiar. The same kind of quiet that comes after losing everything. "I didn't mean no harm," the boy said quickly. "Just asked a question." Still no answer. The Apache crouched beside the mule, touching its neck with careful fingers, as if paying some wordless respect. Then he stood again, his expression unreadable. From his pouch he pulled a small piece of jerky and placed it on a flat rock between them. The boy stared at it. "For me?" The Apache didn't nod or shake his head, just stepped back, letting the gesture speak for itself. The boy hesitated, then picked up the food and took a small bite. It was tough and dry, but tasted like mercy. The two stood in the dying light, neither speaking. Coyotes began to howl somewhere in the distance, their cries sharp and long. The boy pulled his father's coat tighter around himself and looked at the Apache again. "You got a name?" he asked. The Apache looked toward the west, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "Taza," he said at last, his voice low and even. The boy nodded. "Mine's Eli." The silence between them stretched again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with things neither could say. Taza walked past the wagon and pointed toward the darkening ridge. He made a motion with his hand, tracing the shape of a hill. "You saying we go that way?" Eli asked. Taza gave a single nod. Then, with a quick look at the sky, he started walking. Eli hesitated only a second before grabbing his small bundle of things: a canteen, a pocket knife, a scrap of flannel, and hurrying after him. They didn't speak again for hours. The stars grew bright and sharp above them, the kind of stars that seemed close enough to touch. Somewhere behind them, the plains swallowed the sound of the broken wagon. Ali kept glancing at Taza, wondering who he was running from or what he had lost. When they finally stopped near a dry creek bed, Taza began gathering stones to build a small ring for a fire. Eli tried to help, but his hands shook too much. Taza watched him struggle, then wordlessly took over, striking flint until a spark caught. The small flame threw light on both their faces. For the first time, Eli saw how young Taza really was, his eyes dark but tired, his lips pressed tight like someone used to hunger. Eli wanted to ask 100 questions. Where he came from, if he had family, if he had been left behind too. But something told him not to. Instead, he whispered thanks. For the food, Taza didn't answer, just sat back, staring into the fire as though it held memories only he could see. The sound of night insects filled the air, and the fire cracked softly, sending sparks toward the stars. After a while, Eli dozed off. He dreamed of his father's voice, of the road they had taken west in search of new land. But when he awoke, the fire was nearly out, and Taza was gone. Eli sat up fast, his heart thudding. The sky was just beginning to pale with dawn. He looked around, calling softly, "Taza." No answer. Only the sound of wind moving through dry grass. Then he noticed footprints leading away from the creek light, deliberate steps heading toward the mountains. Eli stood, hesitated, and then followed. Each step felt heavier than the last. He didn't know if he was chasing a friend or walking into danger, but something deep inside told him he couldn't stay behind. Not again. When he reached the rise of the next hill, he saw Taza standing still at the edge of a cliff, looking down into a wide canyon bathed in morning light. His bow was drawn, aimed at something below. Eli called out his name, but before Taza could turn, a gunshot cracked through the air. A bird exploded from the brush, and dust kicked up near Taza's feet. Eli froze where he stood, eyes wide as the echo rolled across the canyon. Someone else was out there. Taza turned slowly toward Eli, his expression calm but his eyes fierce. He raised one hand, not in greeting but in warning. Then another shot rang out, closer this time. Lee ducked behind a rock, his heart pounding so loud it filled his ears. He could see movement down below, shadows shifting between the rocks, voices rising. And then it hit him, cold and sharp as the wind sweeping over the ridge. Whoever those men were, they weren't here by accident, he whispered to himself, breath trembling. They're hunting him. And in that moment, Eli realized that whatever path he had stepped onto, there was no turning back. Eli stayed low behind the rock, the dry earth pressing against his cheek as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The sharp scent of gunpowder still hung in the air, and the canyon below seemed to hold its breath. The men moved like shadows, crouching near the rocks, rifles glinting in the rising light. There were 3 of them, he could tell, by their voices low and harsh, the kind of tone used by men who had done this before. Taza hadn't moved. He stood tall at the cliff's edge, still as a hawk, watching the ground. Eli's heart thumped in his chest so hard it almost hurt. He wanted to shout, to warn him, but the warning was already too late. One of the men below raised his rifle again, aiming straight up at the ridge. Eli scrambled to his feet, waving his arms before he could think better of it. "Taza, run," he shouted. The shot came a heartbeat later. Dust exploded where Taza had been standing, but by some miracle, he had already dropped to the ground. Eli couldn't see if he was hit. His hands shook as he ducked again, his throat dry and tight. Then, from somewhere behind him, came the sharp crack of a bowstring. A scream echoed off the canyon walls, rough and sudden. Eli dared to peek out, and saw one of the men clutching his leg, an arrow buried deep. The others ducked behind rocks, shouting orders. Taza moved faster than Eli thought possible. He was already halfway down the slope, slipping through brush and stone with the silence of something born to the land. Eli watched him vanish into the canyon and didn't know whether to follow or flee. The boy looked toward the broken trail behind him, the one that led back to the empty wagon. To the grave under the cottonwood and, realized there was nothing left for him that way. So he tightened the coat around himself and began climbing down. The canyon walls closed in fast, turning the morning light thin and gold. Every sound seemed louder, the crunch of loose gravel under his boots, the quick beat of his heart, the wind brushing through the dry grass. He found Taza crouched behind a fallen log near the creek bed, his bow ready, eyes fixed on the ridge. Eli could see the tension in his shoulders, the controlled stillness of someone used to danger. Eli whispered, "Who are they?" Taza didn't answer at first. His gaze stayed locked on the ridge above. Then he said quietly, "Hunters?" "Hunters?" Eli asked, confused. "What are they hunting?" Taza turned, his eyes toward him. And for a moment, Eli understood without words. "They're after you," Eli whispered. Taza didn't nod, but he didn't deny it either. He pointed to the east, where the canyon curved and rose toward the high country. "We go," he said. Eli looked down at his scraped hands and blistered feet. "They got horses? How are we supposed to outrun them?" But Taz's expression didn't change. "We hide. They follow tracks, not wind." The boy didn't fully understand, but he trusted the calm certainty in Taz's voice. He followed as they moved deeper into the canyon, weaving through brush and over rocks, always keeping close to the walls. Above them, hawks circled in wide arcs, the sound of their wings faint against the wind. As they walked, the land began to change. The dry red earth gave way to patches of green cottonwoods and willows near the trickle of water that ran along the canyon floor. Eli found it strange how life still clung to places that looked so close to dying. After a long silence, Eli said, "Those men, they knew you, didn't they?" Taza didn't answer right away. He stopped to drink from the creek, then sat back on his heels. They know my people," he said finally. "They take land, they take horses, they take blood." Eli frowned. "But why are they after you?" Taz's eyes darkened. "Because I left." The boy didn't ask more, though the answer stirred 100 questions in his mind. Maybe Taza had run from his tribe, or maybe from something worse. Either way, Eli could tell it wasn't a story that wanted telling. They walked until the sun reached high above the cliffs, baking the air until it shimmered. Eli's legs ached, and every breath felt like swallowing dust. When they finally stopped in the shade of a boulder, Taza broke a small piece of dried meat and handed it to him. "Why'd you help me?" Eli asked between bites. Taza looked at him for a long moment before answering. "We were alone." Eli thought about that. He remembered his father saying once that a man could survive anything if he wasn't alone. Maybe Taza understood that better than anyone. The day passed slow, and the shadows grew long again. They found shelter in a narrow cave that overlooked the valley. From there, they could see far below the thin trail winding toward the desert floor, the faint dust clouds where riders might be. Eli sat near the mouth of the cave, trying to keep his eyes open, but exhaustion pulled at him. Before sleep took him, he asked softly, "You ever had someone come looking for you?" Taza didn't answer right away. He sat in the dark, sharpening his knife, his face lit by the flicker of a small fire. Finally, he said, "Once. Long ago." "Did they find you?" Eli asked. "No," Taza said. "And they never will." Eli didn't know what to say to that. He just lay back, staring at the cave ceiling until it blurred into shadow. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled, deep and distant. By morning, the air had changed. It smelled of rain and smoke. When Eli stepped outside, he saw it a thin column of gray rising from the valley below. Someone had lit a fire, and it wasn't for warmth. Taza was already watching it, bow in hand. "They close," he said. Eli swallowed hard. "We can't keep running forever." Taza's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. "You can." Eli felt something twist inside him. "You mean you're leaving?" Taza turned to him, his expression unreadable. "They want me, not you. Go north when the sun rises. Follow the river. Find White Town." Eli shook his head. "No, I'm not leaving you." Taza gave him a look that was almost gentle, but there was steel beneath it. "You stay, you die." Eli stared at him, anger and fear burning together in his chest. "You saved me, not running away." Taza's jaw tightened. He looked toward the smoke again, then back at the boy. "You have father's eyes," he said quietly. "He teach you to fight?" Eli's throat went dry. "He taught me to keep moving." Taza nodded once. as if that were enough.
Ow.
But Eli didn't. He followed Taza again when they left the cave, climbing higher through the rocks until they reached a ridge that looked out across miles of open country. The land spread wide and endless, a sea of gold and red under the rising sun. For a moment it almost looked peaceful. Then, far below, Eli saw them 3 riders on horseback, cutting across the desert like black ants. The sound of distant hooves reached them faintly on the wind. Taza crouched low, watching. He said nothing, but his hands moved quickly, checking his bow, his knife, his pouch. There was no panic in him, only purpose. Eli asked, "What happens if they catch us?" Taza's voice was quiet. "Then we fight." The words sank heavy in Eli's chest. He wanted to believe they could make it out, but the look in Taz's eyes said he'd already counted the cost. They began moving again, keeping to the rocks, every step, measured and silent. Eli's legs burned, but he didn't complain. Each sound behind them made him flinch. Each gust of wind made him glance back. The canyon seemed alive with echoes, footsteps, whispers, the crackle of brush. By afternoon, the riders had drawn closer. They could hear the faint clink of metal, the murmur of voices carried on the wind. Taza stopped at a narrow pass between 2 cliffs and motioned for Eli to crouch. "This place," Taza whispered, "good for hiding, bad for running." Eli looked at the high walls surrounding them. "So what do we do?" Taza drew an arrow and set it to the bowstring. "We wait." The air felt heavy, almost buzzing with silence. Eli could feel his pulse in his fingertips. Somewhere beyond the bend, a horse snorted. Then came the sound of boots on stone. Taza glanced at Eli once, then raised a finger to his lips. The boy held his breath. A shadow stretched across the ground, followed by another. Eli could see the shapes of the riders as they entered the pastel. Broad-shouldered men in worn coats, rifles slung across their backs. One of them laughed low, a sound that made Eli's stomach twist. Taza waited until the first rider stepped close, his boots crunching over the loose rock. Then he moved. The bowstring snapped, the arrow flying so fast Eli barely saw it. The man dropped without a sound, his rifle clattering to the ground. The others shouted, their horses rearing. Gunfire cracked through the canyon, echoing in every direction. Eli ducked, covering his head as dust and rocks sprayed the air. Taza was already gone from his spot, melting into the shadows. The boy tried to see where he'd gone, but saw only flashes, movement, sound, the blur of violence. Then a hand grabbed Eli's shoulder from behind. He turned, eyes wide, staring straight into the muzzle of a rifle. The man holding it was older, his face lined and weathered. He smiled without warmth. "Ain't you a little far from home, boy?" Eli couldn't speak. His mouth went dry, his mind blank. Behind the man, a whisper of motion stirred the air, and the hunter's smile faded. His eyes widened. But before he could turn, an arrow flew from the shadows and found its mark. The rifle fell. The man crumpled. Eli gasped and looked toward the rocks. Taza stood there, eyes dark, breathing hard. For a long moment, neither spoke. The canyon was filled only with the fading echo of the gunfire and the slow, heavy beat of Eli's heart. Then, from somewhere deeper in the canyon, came another voice, a shout, sharp and close. More riders were coming. Taza looked toward the sound, then back at Eli. "We go," he said. And before Eli could think or ask how many more were out there, Taza was already running toward the north end of the canyon, where the walls narrowed and the light turned gold. Eli followed, lungs burning, feet bleeding, his mind full of fear and something else, something that felt like the start of a promise. He didn't know where they were headed or what waited beyond the next ridge. But he knew one thing for sure. Whatever road this was, he wasn't walking it alone anymore. The canyon walls grew taller as they ran, the light narrowing into thin ribbons between the rocks. Eli could feel his lungs burning, his chest aching with every breath. Behind them, faint voices echoed through the ravine, angry, determined, and getting closer. The sound of hooves hitting stone reached them in uneven bursts, telling him that at least one of the riders had survived the ambush. The air was thick with dust and fear, but Taza kept moving forward, steady and silent, his bow clutched tight in his hand. They reached a fork in the trail where 2 paths split, one climbing steeply into the mountains, the other dropping toward a grove of mesquite trees. Taz just long enough to glance at the tracks in the dirt. His fingers brushed over a faint mark shaped like a horseshoe. He looked up at the slope, then at the sky, reading something Eli couldn't see. "This way," he said, motioning toward the mountain path. Eli hesitated. "Won't they see us up there?" "They look down," Taza replied. "Never up." Eli didn't argue. He followed, slipping on loose rock as they climbed higher. The air thinned, and every sound, every footstep, every rustle of the brush felt sharper, more alive. When they finally reached a ledge wide enough to rest, Eli leaned against the rock, gasping for air. Below them, the riders had stopped near the grove, their figures small but clear in the morning light. "They're searching," Eli whispered. Taza nodded. "They hunt for gold, for land, for blood. But they do not know the wind." Eli frowned. "You mean they're bounty hunters?" Taza didn't answer right away, crouched low, his eyes fixed on the men below. Then he said, "They call themselves peacekeepers. They bring chains to my people and say it is for the good of all." Eli felt his stomach tighten. "So they're soldiers?" Taza said. "They're men with no home who want to own everything they see." Eli looked at the hunters again and wondered if any of them had families somewhere far away, or if they had lost just as much as the people they chased. But the thought didn't matter. What mattered was staying alive. When the riders finally turned back, Taza motioned for Eli to follow again. They moved higher until the canyon gave way to rolling hills scattered with pine and dry grass. The smell of sap filled the air, and for the first time in days, the sound of water echoed nearby. They found a small stream winding between rocks, clear and cold. Eli knelt and drank until his head stopped spinning. As they rested, the silence between them began to stretch. Eli had grown used to it the way Taza rarely spoke unless it mattered. But that silence also made room for thoughts that wouldn't leave him alone. He couldn't stop thinking about the gunfire, the faces of the men below, the look in Taza's eyes when he said he'd left his people. Finally, Eli asked, "Why'd you leave them?" Taza didn't look up. He ran his hand through the stream, watching the ripples spread. "My tribe followed an old path," he said slowly. "We hunted. We traded. Then came the men from the east with wagons and guns. They took our land. My brother said we must fight. I said we must hide. He called me coward." Eli listened quietly. "One night soldiers came. My brother stayed to fight. I ran to bring others. I came back. The camp was gone. Only fire." Eli felt a heaviness settle in his chest. "You never found him?" Taza shook his head. "I found his knife." That was enough. The boy didn't know what to say. He looked down at his reflection in the water and thought about his own father, the way he'd believed that going west meant starting over, finding freedom. But maybe there was no such thing as a place untouched by loss. By evening, they had set up camp near a cluster of tall pines. Taza built a small fire using dry twigs and pine needles, its smoke rising thin and gray. Eli sat across from him, chewing what little food they had left. The flames painted Taza's face in golden shadow, his expression unreadable as ever. "Those men," Eli said softly. "They won't stop, will they?" Taza shook his head. "No, they think I know where gold is hidden. They heard stories about an Apache map. They believe all tribes keep secrets of the earth. Is it true?" Eli asked. Taza met his eyes. "There are no maps. It's only memory." Eli nodded slowly, though he wasn't sure he understood. He wondered how many people had died chasing stories like that gold land power. Maybe the men hunting them weren't so different from the ones who had built the wagon his father drove, dreaming of wealth that never came. That night, when Eli finally closed his eyes, he dreamed of the canyon again, only this time he wasn't the one running. He was watching from above as Taza disappeared into the smoke, and the riders surrounded him. When he awoke, his hands were shaking. The fire had burned low and Taza was gone. Eli sat up fast, panic tightening in his chest. He scanned the shadows until he saw movement near the edge of camp. Taza was standing at the tree line, bow ready, eyes fixed on something in the dark. "What is it?" Eli whispered. Taza didn't answer. He motioned for silence. Then Eli heard it tooth, the soft crunch of footsteps, slow and careful. Not an animal, human. Taza crouched low, his body tense. He gestured toward the rocks behind them. "Stay there." Eli obeyed, crouching low as he peered through the darkness. A faint glimmer of metal caught the moonlighter rifle barrel. Then a voice drifted through the trees. "Boy, we know you're up there. Best come down before someone gets hurt. Eli's heart jumped. It was the same rough voice from before, the one that had laughed in the canyon. The riders had found them. Taza didn't move. He whispered, "They come slow." Eli swallowed hard. What do we do? Taz's answer was quiet. We wait for their fear. The silence stretched. The footsteps came closer, and Eli could hear the riders muttering to each other. They were trying to circle the camp. Suddenly, something whistled through the air, an arrow. A man cursed, stumbling back. Then chaos broke loose. Gunfire exploded, bright flashes lighting up the trees. The sound echoed like thunder. Eli ducked behind a rock as bullets tore through the brush. He could see Taza moving like a shadow, his arrows striking one after another. The riders shouted, firing blindly into the dark. One of them fell near the fire, his hat rolling into the dirt. But there were too many of them. Eli counted at least 4 shapes, still moving. Their voices getting closer. "Taza!" Eli shouted. "They're all around us!" Taza grabbed him by the arm, pulling him toward the slope behind the camp. "This way." They scrambled up the rocky hill, dirt and pine needles slipping under their boots. The gunfire faded behind them, but the shouting didn't. When they reached the ridge, Eli turned back and saw the camp burning, the flames climbing high into the night. Taza stopped only when they reached a cluster of boulders hidden by tall grass. They crouched there, both gasping for breath. Eli's hands trembled as he looked at the fire below. "They'll keep coming," he said. Taz's jaw tightened. "Then we make them chase ghosts." He began tracing lines in the dirt, marking trails and bends. Eli watched, trying to understand. "You've done this before, haven't you?" Taza nodded once. "Many times." The boy hesitated. "Is it every time? Did you lose people?" Taz's eyes flicked toward the horizon. Every time, the words hung heavy between them. Eli realized then that Taza wasn't just running from hunters, he was running from a past that wouldn't let him go. And somehow, Eli had become part of it. When dawn came, they were already on the move again. The land shifted as they traveled north dry ridges, giving way to rolling plains dotted with sagebrush. The wind carried the faint cry of an eagle overhead. For a moment it almost felt peaceful, but Eli knew better. As they crossed a shallow stream, Eli noticed something half-buried near the bank, a broken wagon wheel, old and gray. Nearby, scraps of canvas flapped weakly in the wind. He stopped, staring. "This looks like a trail," he said. "Maybe a settlement's close." Taza studied the ground. "Maybe," he said carefully. "Or maybe someone died trying to find one." Eli knelt, brushing the dirt away. Beneath the wheel was a small wooden box, weathered but still whole. Inside lay a silver locket and a folded piece of paper. The writing was faded, but he could make out a few words, names, maybe, and a date from years ago. "Someone left this behind," Eli said softly. Taza looked at him. "Everything out here is left behind." They buried the box again before moving on. But the moment stayed with Eli, a reminder that the land was filled with stories like theirs, half-finished, lost to time. By late afternoon, dark clouds began gathering over the horizon. Thunder rumbled again, closer this time. Taza stopped and looked toward the distant line of trees. "Storm coming," he said. "We find shelter." They hurried toward a low ridge where a narrow cave opened at its base. As the first drops of rain fell, they slipped inside, the wind howling outside like a warning. Eli sat near the entrance, watching the sky flash white with lightning. "You think they'll stop chasing us?" Taza didn't answer right away. His face was turned toward the storm, eyes distant. "They don't stop," he said. "Men who chase gold never stop." Eli felt the weight of those words settle over him. The storm raged on outside, thunder rolling through the valley, and he realized that the land itself seemed caught between peace and war, just like the people who lived on it. He turned to look at Taza, who sat silent, the firelight flickering across his face. For the first time, Eli saw something in his eyes that looked like fear, not for himself, but for what was coming next. And in that silence, Eli knew the fight was far from over. The storm went on through most of the night. Rain beat against the mouth of the cave, wind howling through the pines like a living thing. Eli sat near the small fire trying to keep warm, though every gust sent a chill through his bones. Taza hadn't spoken in hours. He sat still, sharpening his knife, eyes flicking toward the cave entrance every few minutes. The firelight danced across his face, showing calm on the surface, but something restless underneath. Eli finally said, "You think they're still out there?" "Rain covers tracks. Makes it easy to move." Eli frowned, his hands tightening around his knees. "Then they could be close." "They are," Taza said softly. The boy's stomach twisted. The sound of thunder seemed to echo deeper inside the cave now, closer. He listened for footsteps or the snap of twigs outside, but there was only the sound of the storm and his own heartbeat. Taza stood and moved to the mouth of the cave, peering out into the dark. His silhouette looked like part of the mountain, unmoving, solid, yet the air around him felt charged, like he could sense something coming before it arrived. When morning came, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained heavy and gray. Mist curled through the trees, wrapping everything in quiet. Eli followed Taza as they left the cave, their clothes damp, the earth soft beneath their boots. The air smelled of wet pine and smoke. They hadn't gone far when Taza stopped suddenly, crouched down and touched the ground, his fingers tracing something faint in the mud. Eli leaned closer and saw them hoof prints, deep and fresh. "They're close," Taza said. "Half a day, maybe less." Eli's throat went dry. "What do we do now?" Taza looked toward the mountains, where the clouds broke slightly, revealing a thin line of sunlight. "We lead them there." Eli didn't understand at first. "You mean go to them?" "No," Taza said, standing. "We lead them to a place they can't leave." The boy followed, unsure but trusting him. They moved through thick forest, climbing higher until the trees thinned and the land turned to rock. The wind picked up, sharp and cold, carrying the cry of an eagle somewhere above. The trail grew narrow, twisting along the side of a ridge that overlooked a deep canyon. Eli had to keep his hands on the rock to keep from slipping. After hours of climbing, they reached a plateau, where the ground leveled out. From there, Eli could see far in every direction the vast stretch of plains to the east, the silver line of a river in the distance, and the dark shapes of riders far below, tiny but unmistakable. "They're still coming," he whispered. Taza nodded. "They will follow us to the end." Eli stared at him. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" Taza didn't answer right away. He looked toward the horizon, the wind pulling at his hair. "Some things you can't run from," he said. "You can only meet them halfway." The boy wanted to ask what he meant, but Taza was already walking toward a line of boulders near the edge of the plateau. He began checking the ground, searching for something. Finally, he knelt and brushed away dirt and grass to reveal a narrow opening beneath the rocks. "What's that?" Eli asked. "Old path," Taza said. "Used by my people long ago. It leads through the mountain. We can hide there." Eli peered into the dark hole. It didn't look like it could fit more than one person at a time, and the air coming out of it smelled old and still. "What if it doesn't come out anywhere?" "It does," Taza said, "but not safe for horses. They won't follow." Eli nodded, though doubt gnawed at him. He trusted Taza's instincts more than anything now, but something about the air felt wrong, as if the land itself was holding its breath. They rested for a while in the shade of the rocks, sharing the last of their food. Taza sat quietly, his bow across his knees, watching the horizon. Eli noticed his hand shaking slightly as he tied the string tighter. It was the first time he'd seen any weakness in him. "You're not scared, are you?" Eli asked softly. Taza didn't look up. "Fear is the thing that keeps you alive. Just know its face better than most." The words stuck with Eli. He thought of his father, the look he'd had when they'd first set out, west hopeful, but afraid. Everyone was chasing something out here, and everyone was running from something too. By late afternoon, the wind changed again. It came from the south this time, carrying a faint sound voices, distant but growing. Taza stood, his expression sharpening. "They're near," he said. Eli turned toward the ridge and saw movement far below. Dust rose in thin trails behind the riders as they climbed. Sunlight flashed off their rifles. There was no doubt now. The hunters had found their trail again. Taza grabbed his bow and motioned toward the hidden path. "Go inside," he said. "What about you?" Eli asked. "I will follow," Taza said. "I need to lead them away first." "No," Eli said quickly. "I'm not leaving you." Taza's eyes met his, steady but urgent. "You must. If I don't come, you keep walking until you see water. Then go north." Don't stop. I owe you. You owe me nothing, Taza said. You owe your father your life. Don't waste it. Before Eli could argue again, Taza turned and started down the slope toward the riders. Eli watched him go, heart pounding. He wanted to call out to stop him, but something inside told him this was how it had to be. He ducked into the narrow tunnel, crawling through the cold dark. The passage twisted and turned, the walls closing in tight. It smelled of earth and stone, the air heavy. Every sound his breathing, the scrape of his boots echoed louder than it should. Then he heard it. Gunfire, sharp and distant at first, then closer. The echoes rolled through the tunnel like thunder. He froze, his pulse racing. He wanted to turn back, but the memory of Taz's voice pushed him forward. Keep walking until you see water. Don't stop. After what felt like hours, he reached a small opening where light filtered through cracks in the rock. He pressed his eye to it and saw the ridge below. Taza was there, moving between rocks, his bow flashing as he loosed arrows. The riders had spread out, shouting orders, rifles blazing. Eli's breath caught in his throat. There were more of them than before, at least 6 now. The air shimmered with heat and dust. Taza was outnumbered, but he moved with calm precision, using every shadow, every ledge. He struck and disappeared, never staying still long enough to be an easy target. But the men were closing in. Eli watched helplessly as one of the riders dismounted and began climbing toward Taza's position. Another circled wide to flank him. He knew what was about to happen, his fists clenched, his heart hammering so hard it hurt. He looked down at his belt where his father's pocket knife hung. He whispered to himself, I can't just watch. Leaving the safety of the tunnel, he crawled out through a side opening and began moving down the slope. Every step felt heavier, every sound too loud. He could see Taza now, pinned between 2 rocks, his arrows nearly gone. Eli picked up a loose stone and hurled it down the ridge. It clattered loudly, drawing one of the riders' attention. The man turned, shouting to the others. Taza used the moment to move, springing out from cover and firing his last arrow. It struck true, and the man dropped. Gunfire exploded again. Eli threw himself behind a boulder as bullets tore into the earth nearby. The noise was deafening. He could taste dirt and smoke in the air. Through the haze, he saw Taza running toward the edge of the plateau. The last 2 riders were chasing him hard, rifles ready. Eli felt panic rise in his throat. He had to do something, but he was just a boy with a dull knife. Then he remembered what Taza said about the mountain path. It didn't fit horses. That meant it was narrow, unstable. If the riders followed too close, maybe the ground would give way. Eli began moving fast, circling toward the top of the ridge. The wind tore at his clothes, his hands scraped raw against the rocks. He reached the edge just as Taza stumbled near a cliff drop. The riders were closing in, their shouts echoing through the canyon. Eli shouted, Taza, this way. Taza turned, his eyes wide with surprise when he saw him. I told you to go, he shouted back. Before Eli could answer, one of the riders fired. The bullet struck the rock near Taza's feet, sending shards flying. Taza fell to one knee, clutching his side. Eli screamed his name, his voice breaking. The second rider raised his rifle again, but just then, thunder rumbled across the sky. A sound so deep and sudden it felt like the earth itself had spoken. The wind picked up, sharp and fierce, carrying dust and grit. Eli saw the slope beneath the riders shift. The ground cracked, stones tumbling. The man's horse reared, panicked hooves slipping on the wet rock. Taza pushed himself up, trying to move, but his leg buckled. Eli slid down the ridge toward him, ignoring the pain tearing through his knees and hands. The air was thick with dust now, the world narrowing to gunfire, shouts, and the roar of wind. He reached Taza and grabbed his arm. Come on, you have to get up. Taza looked at him, pain flashing in his eyes. Go, Eli, go now. But Eli shook his head, refusing to let go. Die. Behind them, the riders were regaining control, moving closer. The storm clouds above gathered fast, swallowing the last of the light. Lightning flashed, white and violent, striking the canyon rim. The ground shook. Rocks split open, and the wind screamed through the cliffs. The riders shouted, their horses panicking again. Eli pulled harder, his voice hoarse. We can make it. Taza tried to stand, his bow still clutched in his hand, but his strength was fading. He looked toward the edge of the canyon, then back at Eli. His eyes held something fierce and final. Listen to me, he said. No matter what happens, keep walking. Eli didn't understand what he meant, but before he could ask, another gunshot rang out. The sound echoed through the canyon, and the world seemed to stop. The wind, the thunder, even the rain all went quiet for one terrible heartbeat as Eli turned toward the sound. The riders were still there. Smoke rose from one of their rifles. And beside him, Taza stumbled, his bow falling from his hands. Eli's scream was lost in the wind as the storm broke open above them. Rain pouring down like the sky itself was crying. The rain poured so hard it blurred the world into streaks of gray and silver. Eli dropped to his knees beside Taza, his hands shaking as he tried to lift him. The Apache's breathing came in short, rough bursts. Blood mixed with the rain running down the side of his ribs. Eli's heart hammered, refusing to accept what his eyes saw. The sound of hooves pounded again, closer this time. The riders hadn't given up. They were coming to finish what they started. Eli looked down at Taza, who opened his eyes and met his gaze with quiet strength. "You have to go," he whispered, his voice barely audible against the roar of the storm. "I'm not leaving you," Eli said, his voice cracking. Taza gripped his arm weakly. "You keep walking, just like I said." Eli wanted to argue, but the look in Taza's eyes stopped him. It wasn't pleading, it was command. A last piece of trust between them. Eli nodded, tears mixing with the rain, and Taza managed the faintest smile before closing his eyes again. Gunfire echoed through the canyon, and Eli scrambled to his feet. Dragging himself toward the narrow path through the rocks, he slipped once, cutting his palm on a sharp stone, but he didn't stop. Behind him, lightning flashed again, lighting up the shape of riders fighting to control their horses on the slick ground. He turned just in time to see the edge of the ridge crumble beneath them. The mountain groaned, and the men fell with their horses into the canyon below, swallowed by the storm. Eli stood frozen, watching until the noise faded into the thunder. The ridge was silent again, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and smoke. He turned back, but where Taza had been lying, the rain had washed away everything except the imprint in the mud where his body had rested. For a long moment, Eli just stared, unsure if he was seeing the truth or the storm playing tricks on him. He whispered Taza, but there was no answer. Only the wind moving softly through the pines below. He picked up the bough Taza had dropped, the string broken but the wood still warm. Holding it close, he turned toward the mountain path again and started walking. His body ached, his legs trembling, but his mind stayed locked on Taza's words. "Keep walking until you see water. Don't stop." For 2 days he followed the winding trail through the mountain. The rain finally gave way to sunlight, and the air grew warmer. Birds returned to the trees, and wildflowers pushed through the damp soil. It felt as though the land itself was breathing again, after holding still for too long. Eli found a stream by the 3rd day, its clear water running fast between smooth stones. He knelt beside it, drinking until his thirst was gone, and then washed the blood and dirt from his hands. For the first time since the fight, he let himself rest. The forest around him was quiet, except for the soft rustle of wind through the leaves. He built a small fire and sat beside it, staring at the flame. In the dancing light, he saw flashes of the past few weeks, his father's wagon burning. The storm, the cave, the long climb, and Taz's steady eyes when everything else was falling apart. Eli took out the small leather pouch Taza had carried. Inside were 2 items, a carved wooden charm shaped like an eagle and a folded piece of buckskin with markings on it. He unfolded it carefully and saw a rough map drawn in dark ink. It showed a trail leading from the canyon north toward what looked like open plains. Beside the path, written in faint, careful letters, were 2 words, "Home Road." Eli traced the markings with his thumb. Maybe it was where Taz's people once lived. Maybe it was a promise he never got to keep. Either way, it was something real to hold on to. The next morning, Eli followed the direction of the map. The land began to change trees, thinning, the ground opening into wide, rolling fields. Herds of antelope moved in the distance, and the air smelled of dry grass and sage. It was the first time since everything began that he felt a hint of peace. At dusk, he reached a small ridge overlooking a valley. In the center stood a cluster of wooden cabins, smoke rising gently from a few chimneys. A horse corral sat nearby, and voices carried faintly through the wind. It looked like a small frontier settlement, one of the ones his father used to trade with. Eli hesitated for a long moment, afraid of what he might find or not find. But then he thought of Taza again, of the way he had faced danger without looking back. Taking a deep breath, he started down the hill. A man chopping wood near the cabin saw him first, called out, and a few others came out from their homes. Eli stumbled toward them, exhausted but determined. When they reached him, one of the older men put a hand on his shoulder. "Easy, son. Where you come from?" Eli opened his mouth to answer, but his voice failed him. The man looked at his torn clothes and the bow in his hand. "You've been through hell," the man said gently. "Come inside. We'll get you fed and cleaned up." They led him into one of the cabins. The warmth hit him like sunlight after a long winter. A woman gave him soup and bandaged his hands while he sat quietly by the fire. She asked his name. He simply said, "Eli." She nodded and told him he was safe now. That night, he slept on a bed for the first time in weeks. But even in sleep, he dreamed of the canyon, of the storm, and of Taza standing against the wind, refusing to fall. When he awoke, dawn light filled the room. For a moment, he thought he heard someone humming softly outside, a tune he couldn't quite place. He stepped out of the cabin and looked toward the rising sun. The sky was streaked with orange and gold. In the distance, near the edge of the valley, he saw a hawk circling high above the trees. Its wings caught the light just right, and for an instant it looked like the carved eagle charm he carried. Eli smiled faintly. He took the charm from his pocket and held it up to the sky. "You found your home road," he whispered. In the days that followed, Eli stayed with the settlers. He helped mend fences, fetch water, and tend to the horses. Life in the valley was simple, quiet, and full of the kind of work that kept the mind from breaking. But every evening, when the sun began to sink, he would walk out to the edge of the fields and watch the horizon, listening for the sound of the wind through the grass. The others noticed his quietness, but didn't question it. The land had a way of making people keep their stories close. He didn't speak of the riders or the storm or the man who'd saved him. Some things belonged to the mountains and stayed there. One morning, weeks later, as Eli was checking the fences near the northern trail, he saw something in the distance, a lone figure on horseback, moving slowly along the ridge. He shaded his eyes, heart suddenly racing. The figure stopped, looking down toward the valley. For a long moment they didn't move. Then the rider lifted a hand in what looked like a silent salute before turning and disappearing into the line of trees. Eli stood there a long time, unsure if what he'd seen was real or only something the mind made from hope. But deep down, he felt certain. The wind shifted, carrying that same steady calm he'd felt around Taza. He walked back to the settlement with a quiet sense of peace, holding the bow a little tighter. He no longer felt abandoned. The world had changed around him, and though he had lost much, he had found something to strength, belonging, and the understanding that home wasn't always a place. Sometimes it was a promise kept in someone's memory. That night, as the stars came out one by one, Eli sat by the fire outside and whispered, "Were you abandoned too?" The flames flickered, and the wind stirred the trees as if answering him. He smiled, looking out toward the dark horizon where the mountains slept. Somewhere beyond them, the road kept winding just like life, rough and uncertain, but still moving forward. And for the first time, Eli felt ready to follow wherever it led.